The 11th century Islamic philosopher and mystic al-Ghazali worried about the problem of truth. He considered that if the senses can be mistaken, and that their assumptions can be corrected by the use of logic, then what if there is a higher form of knowledge that can correct the errors of logic? He found this higher knowledge in communing with the mind of God, which needed no justification beyond itself. We need not hold any particular religious belief ourselves to feel great sympathy for his concerns. That at the core of human existence lies a certain dissatisfaction, a restlessness. Unconsciously, we are searching for answers that will give us some feeling of objectivity, something that grounds us and gives what we do meaning. When we use the term self-consciousness, part of what we are trying to describe is the awareness of our endless seeking. And as we become aware of it, we worry about it. We call it anxiety, and proceed in turn to become anxious about being anxious. The presence of anxiety confirms what we suspected all along. There is something wrong with us, and so we resume our seeking even more restlessly, unable to be still. But while most of us try to run from this emptiness by keeping ourselves continually distracted, some individuals, here and there, haven't always done so, and in those moments they found something answers could not give. From Nagarjuna to Nietzsche, there has been a recurring insight that humans will often make so much noise because they yearn for silence, a silence of the mind. We seem to very easily forget what philosophers and artists try to show us, that we can find all that we need without definite answers. And when we don't get these answers, we invent them. Truth, beauty, reason, purity, piety, God, the good, ideals are attempts at defining designated stopping points for our questions, a place where we believe we can find some sort of certainty. They are attempts at quieting our restless mind. Each culture has contrived different ways of defining what is true and right and beautiful, and each laughs at what other cultures have considered true, right, and beautiful, especially those cultures that came before it, in an attempt to reassure us that we have finally found what is truly good, what is truly right, and what is truly real, forgetting how every culture that existed before thought the same and with the same conviction. The wise may find truth and beauty in all cultures without needing to believe in any of the specific truths of each, but ultimately all humans inescapably fail to a greater or lesser extent, both at understanding and at withholding belief. And as we hold any one idea to be true, we necessarily close our thoughts off from understanding other ideas. In providing us with answers, the culture we create is attempting to give meaning to our existence, rather than face up to its ultimate meaninglessness. But in the end, the answers it gives are themselves meaningless.
We might say the point of the individual is simply that he contributes to the welfare of the race. And the point of the race is that it reproduces itself, to reproduce itself, to reproduce itself, and keep going. And that isn't really a point at all. That's just fatuous.
Here, Alan Watts reminds us of how common it is to seek meaning in human endeavours, not by considering individuals as ends in themselves, but rather as a means to an end, imagining humans as rational beings that will be perfectly fulfilled and content to work towards the singular and never-ending betterment of humankind, perfectly playing the part of rational, diligent cogs in a rational, diligent machine, until one day we inevitably go extinct. And not one of these cogs would ever think to ask, if my individual existence is so valueless that I'm not free to simply do with it as I wish, what is the value of living at all? However, there is another way in which we describe things as being meaningful, as making sense, ways which seem closer to what we mean when we talk about the meaningfulness of existence. that it is worth something to exist, to ourselves at least. We say, for example, that music is meaningful, and by this we don't mean that it performs a specific function. We say that dance is meaningful, and certainly it is one of the greatest expressions of human joy when done for its own sake. But it certainly gets you nowhere. In tracing the meandering lines of Bach's music, where at the end of a lengthy composition we may easily find ourselves back where the whole piece started, it would be hard to try to explain what the point of it all was. In listening to the ebb and flow of one of the great ragas as performed by Ali Akbar Khan, we may find in it the same meaning we find in watching waves crashing on a beach. No meaning. What we find is not that imagined act of creation that so inflates the egos of artists, nor the imposition of something upon the world so as to achieve a desired effect, but rather a sublime reflection of that way in which the world is, shifting, flowing, in a never-ending dance, a meaningful meaninglessness. We find the idea of the world itself as art, as dance, as music, and as play in many of the great mythologies and philosophies of human culture. The ebb and flow of a musical composition is at heart an alternation of moments of tension with moments of resolution. Similarly, an author introduces elements of tension within a novel for no other reason than that without them there would be nothing to resolve within the story. In fact, without them there would be no story at all. Art is the greatest form of play known to man, and by reflection, many cultures around the world have imagined that God speaks, or thinks, or dreams the world into being as a great act of cosmic play. The most interesting incarnation of such a mythology tells the story that God laughs, and God's laughter is the world. There are few things that give greater pleasure or meaning to our existence than to suddenly and unexpectedly find ourselves laughing uncontrollably. A life without laughter would likely not be a life worth living. And yet, it is precisely in such moments that we lose all pretense of rationality. The sounds we produce become utterly meaningless babble. We are made speechless, unable to think, unable even to breathe properly. For a moment, we forget ourselves, and all else that may have appeared as significant becomes nothing. When we say that these things are meaningful, we are saying so not because they mean something other than themselves, but because they are so satisfying as they are. Because in that moment, our insatiable yearning for meaning in our existence, our need to search for or invent a reason for everything is quieted. For a moment, at least, we are satisfied. And in this moment of quiet, when all the noise of those meaningless important things has died away, we may perhaps find some fulfillment in making something or in contemplating something, not for any particular reason, but simply because we take delight in the making or the contemplating. Oscar Wilde believed that art in its most exalted forms is useless, and that it is so great precisely because it is useless. Similarly, he reflected that all bad poetry is deeply sincere. It stems from obvious needs and offers obvious solutions to obvious problems. However, if the obvious solutions were effective, the problems would have been solved long ago. And yet here we are, still searching. It may appear useful to earn money or acquire resources or develop infrastructures and communities that allow for human existence, but only if that existence is in itself satisfying. If existing isn't enjoyable, then why even bother? The rational cannot account for the irrational, and without it, it cannot even account for itself. By focusing exclusively on that which is merely useful, the development and distribution of material wealth, one could imagine achieving a global utopia that is not too dissimilar from the 21st century West. A world in which virtually everyone has a high standard of living, has access to better technology and to more information than even any emperor, living in the past ever had, and yet also a world in which people are dissatisfied, anxious, constantly seeking some sort of confirmation, and in general not actually that happy of living in. Perhaps all those useful things we didn't give us what we were looking for. If you had to love someone, not because you freely chose and desired to do so, but out of a sense of duty, or because you were told that this is what you should do, you would be unable to make yourself fall in love with them. And love is a very good metaphor for study, for dedicating one's life with care and attention to something, for all those things which we do that give our lives meaning. We retrace the lines over and over again with great care, not because we have some reason to do so, but because we could not do otherwise. Late in his life, Thomas Aquinas retreated into a form of silence. He claimed that he had been the recipient of a revelation, and that all that he had written in his life was of the worth of straw when compared to this revelation. The body of works he had composed up to this point runs at well over 8 million words, and yet he did not go on to define the nature of this experience. After the revelation, there were no more words. When he experienced that which he had spent his life discussing, like Dante in the Divine Comedy, he was left speechless. When we are asking what the value of art is, fundamentally, what we are doing is once again asking what it can do for us in a very narrow sense. Art cannot do anything for you. In fact, it does not care about you in the slightest, and has nothing whatsoever to offer other than what it is. It will not make you richer, or give you nice things, or provide solutions to your problems. However, what you may find in it is that many of those aspects of your existence that appear to you as problems may be little more than illusions. What you may find is not the salvation promised by a dream of mass production and material wealth for all, a promise made in turn by marketers, politicians, and scientists, but a form of silence, a place where, for a moment, the mind stops.